The courthouse clock struck 9 a.m. when I stepped into Jackson County Court, the echo of my boots carrying through the marble halls. My army dress blues were pressed to perfection, ribbons lined like measured torque specks, and the small bronze Army Achievement Medal caught the weak Tennessee sunlight pouring through the tall windows. To the casual observer, it should have been a proud moment. To my family seated just 30 feet away, it was fuel for mockery. The room smelled of old paper, dust, and lemon polish, like a library where secrets were shelved and left to rot. I had walked into ambushes before, but never one quite like this. Combat had rules, family didn't. Look at her, my mother's voice cracked across the benches before the judge even sat down. Rosa Martinez had always been good at timing her strikes. A dirty girl with grease on her hands, she thinks she can run a legacy. Heads turned, a few gasps, a few laughs, the kind of nervous amusement people offer when cruelty is dressed up as honesty. Lewis leaned forward from his seat at the petitioner's table, tie perfectly knotted, smile as sharp as the crease in his shirt. Our grandfather built Martinez Auto on reputation and clean hands, he said loudly enough for the clerk to glance up. Not oil stains and battlefield blood. My other brother, Javier, tapped the deed folder on the table as though it already belonged to him. We're the steady ones, Your Honor. She's the reckless one, always has been. The attorney for their side rose next. He was tall, thin, with silver hair combed to the side, the kind of lawyer who treated words like scalpels. Your Honor, this case is straightforward, he began. His eyes flicked toward me with theatrical disdain. This garage has served the county for 50 years. The family business deserves steady hands, not a soldier with a record of bloodshed who believes a torque wrench is a crown. I didn't move. In the Army, you learn that silence can be a weapon sharper than steel. A mechanic doesn't argue with a stuck bolt. You apply pressure, heat, counter-pressure. Timing matters more than noise. But the strike came anyway, as if choreographed. She doesn't belong here, Mom said, standing as though she were in church. She left us to play soldier while her brothers carried the real burden. She was never steady enough to keep this family's name clean. She's a grease monkey, a dirty girl. That's all she's ever been. The courtroom hummed. The words landed like shrapnel. I felt every eye in the room crawl over my uniform, reading ribbons, imagining rifles, not the years I'd spent crawling under half-destroyed engines in combat zones. The judge cleared his throat. Staff Sergeant Martinez, you'll have time to respond when counsel is finished. Staff Sergeant, not daughter, not heir, not mechanic, just the rank I had carried like armor across 2 deployments. I caught a movement in the back row. A man in a navy suit, hair cut too close for comfort, no tie. He wasn't local. He wasn't here to watch a family inheritance spat. His gaze tracked like a scope across the room. When his eyes met mine, he gave the smallest nod, operator's recognition, silent as any convoy briefing I'd ever been in. Something else was in play here. The lawyer adjusted his cuffs, savoring the silence. Your Honor, let's not ignore the facts. Yes, she has an Army medal. Yes, she tinkered with Humvees overseas. But medals don't erase blood. They don't translate into leadership. And they don't entitle a soldier with a history of recklessness to inherit the good name of Martinez Auto. I let my breath settle, slow and deliberate, the way you do before twisting a bolt that might shear. Kept 500 vehicles running in combat zones, I said flat like a torque spec. The words cut the air with no embellishment. 0 quit. Mom laughed, a laugh without warmth, one that had teeth. You see, she thinks war stories are resumes. The lawyer leaned closer to the bench. Even if she did what she claims, even if she greased engines under fire, this is not Afghanistan. This is Jackson County. And let the record show, Your Honor, this isn't only about who holds a deed. This is about fraud. He paused, letting the word hang like a loose bolt ready to fall. Evidence suggests Martinez Auto, under this family's name, is linked to a $50 million defense contract scheme. The hands that inherit it must be clean. They cannot be hands stained with battlefield grease and scandal. The gallery erupted in whispers. $50 million. That wasn't the number of receipts from tune-ups and tire rotations. That was contractor money, dangerous money. I felt the suited man in the back row watching me again, his face unreadable. He didn't laugh. He didn't look shocked. He looked like someone checking torque on a weapon before firing. The judge rapped his gavel once. Order. I straightened, the metal at my chest catching light like a warning flare. This wasn't only about inheritance. This wasn't only about family humiliation. This was something else. Something national, maybe bigger than any of us realized. As I sat back, the lawyer stacked his papers with calm precision, already preparing for the next blow. My brothers whispered to each other like conspirators. Mom smirked. The man in the back row leaned forward just enough to whisper across the noise as people shifted in their seats. His voice carried only to me, soft and sharp. This isn't just family court. This is national. The words echoed like the click of a ratchet in an empty garage. I sat still, but my pulse quickened. The courtroom wasn't just a place for inheritance disputes anymore. It was a battlefield with a different kind of ambush, and if my family thought calling me dirty girl was enough to break me, they hadn't seen what grease and steel could do when pushed to their limit. The judge signaled a recess, the gavel echoing one more time. I rose, dress blues pulling tight across my shoulders, the whispers swelling like an engine revving too high. I knew the fight wasn't about to stay inside these walls. When the recess ended, the past would be dragged into the open, and the story of why my grandfather once whispered, "Grease in your hands means fire in your soul," would finally begin to matter. The courthouse doors slammed shut behind me at 10:15 a.m., the echo trailing into silence. I walked down the courthouse steps, still in dress blues, the metal burning like a hot plate against my chest. My brothers stayed inside with their lawyer, but I could hear my mother's voice even through the glass. That voice always carried. It carried when I was 8 years old in the garage, too. I smelled the memory before I saw it, burnt grass mixed with gasoline, the sweet tang of motor oil hanging in the summer air. Our backyard was a graveyard of old machines. A mower with a cracked handle, a rusty dirt bike, the Chevy truck my father swore he'd fix one day. I was the only child who touched them with curiosity instead of contempt. That day I was kneeling beside the busted mower, socket wrench in my hand, tiny fingers greasy black. I had figured out that the spark plug was the problem. With a twist, I pulled it free, proud as any soldier raising a captured flag. "Rosa!" My father's voice boomed. He walked out of the shop wiping his hands on a clean rag, the rag that was always too good to touch my skin. Behind him trailed Louis, already the golden boy at 12, and Javier, a year older than me but tall, broad, the natural heir. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" My father barked. "Fixing it," I said, spark plug clutched like a trophy. His eyes went straight to my hands. "Look at you covered in filth. A girl's hands aren't supposed to look like that." Louis laughed. "Told you she's weird." Javier grinned. "Dirty girl." The word stuck like tar. My father yanked the socket wrench from my hand. "Con guy PH letter 1EA3 IM letter 1EB7CV, not crawl under engines." He threw the wrench into the dirt. "This is not your place." I wanted to scream that I understood more about combustion than either of my brothers. But I didn't. Silence was survival even then. It was my grandfather who stepped forward from the shadows of the garage. Earl Martinez, face weathered like old steel, eyes sharp with something more than disapproval. He didn't raise his voice. He just crouched beside me, picked up the wrench, and pressed it back into my hand. Grease in your hands means fire in your soul, little one, he said softly, so only I could hear. Don't you ever let them shame you out of it. I didn't know then what he meant, not fully. But that whisper was the only metal I carried into childhood. Years later, the FBI would tell me Grandpa had worked on Army vehicles during Vietnam, and that he'd once testified against a corrupt contractor who supplied bad steel to the government. That was why he never got along with the men who now tried to erase me. The nickname stuck. Louis and Javier made it a weapon. Dirty girl. They spat it at me at school, at the dinner table, at Christmas when I brought out trays of food instead of gifts. Every time I touched an engine, they reminded me I was wrong. But Grandpa's voice fought back in my head. Fire in your soul. The tension only deepened one July afternoon when I stripped an old dirt bike down to its frame and rebuilt it piece by piece. I rolled it out of the garage, proud, grease to my elbows, and kicked it to life with one hard stomp. The engine roared, a war cry in miniature. Instead of praise, I got the cold blade of judgment. My father stormed out, red-faced. This is not pride, this is shame. Girls who act like boys never find husbands, never build families, they just end up alone. Louis smirked. She'll marry her wrench. Javier added, or that bike, it's the only thing that would take her. The words carved me out hollow, but I refused to let them see it. I revved the throttle until the noise drowned their laughter, and for one reckless second I imagined riding far, far away. The irony is, they thought they were teaching me my limits. All they did was train me for a future where ridicule was background, noise and machines were my only language. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon at 8:30 p.m., I sat on the garage steps, fingers still black, listening to cicadas shriek like 1,000 engines revving at once. Grandpa eased down beside me with a beer in his hand. He didn't say much. He never did, but he looked at me like I wasn't broken. They'll call you dirty until the day they need you clean, he muttered. Remember that. I didn't know what he meant then. I would later, much later, because the day would come when an accident in that same garage would turn every sneer into an accusation and cement my role as the family's scapegoat. By the time I was 13, the nickname had settled like oil stains on a shop floor, permanent, no matter how hard I scrubbed. Dirty girl echoed in the halls of school, whispered at family dinners, muttered by neighbors who thought repeating it was harmless fun. Only Grandpa Earl resisted the tide, but even his steady presence couldn't shield me from what came next. It happened on a sweltering Saturday in July, the kind where the Tennessee air stuck to your throat like tar. The garage clock read 2:45 p.m. when I crouched under the hood of my father's prized Chevy pickup, a machine that hadn't run in years. My brothers had given up on it weeks earlier, declaring it hopeless. I wanted to prove them wrong. The radio played Merle Haggard in the background, half drowned by cicadas buzzing outside. Sweat rolled into my eyes, and I blinked through the sting as I tightened a stubborn bolt near the carburetor. The wrench slipped, sparked against metal, and in an instant the whole world changed. Flames leapt from the engine bay, orange tongues licking up the hood, smoke curling into my face. I stumbled back, coughing, but before I could cry out, I saw him, my father, pinned beneath the truck frame, legs trapped as he reached to steady a jack that had slipped. Rosa! His voice wasn't thunder this time. It was fear. Instinct took over. I grabbed the heavy wrench, the one too big for my hands, and smashed it against the jammed lever. Metal shrieked. The frame shifted just enough for him to pull free. He crawled out, coughing, shirt smeared with grease and ash, but by then the flames were spreading. Louis ran in, shouting, Javier behind him with a garden hose too weak to matter. Dad staggered to his feet, pointed at me. His face twisted into rage that masked the panic in his eyes. You reckless little fool, he bellowed. You nearly killed me. The words hit harder than the smoke. I tried, but my throat burned. Louis chimed in triumphant. Told you she's dangerous, can't leave her alone with anything. Javier added, she'll burn the whole place down one day. The hose sputtered. Grandpa came running with a fire extinguisher, foam swallowing the flames until only smoke remained. He didn't look at my brothers. He didn't look at my father. He put a hand on my shoulder, steady as ever. You saved him, he said quietly. Don't forget that, but nobody else saw it that way. By 4 p.m., the family had rewritten the story. The official version was simple. Rosa caused the fire. Rosa distracted Dad. Rosa nearly killed him. It spread faster than the flames had, carried to aunts, cousins, neighbors. By supper, I was the girl who burned her own house. At school, kids mimed striking matches when I walked past. Careful, one said. She'll torch your locker. Teachers looked at me differently, a mix of pity and suspicion. That night, sitting alone on the back steps, I scraped black soot from my fingernails and thought about Grandpa's words. You saved him. But the silence from inside the house told me it didn't matter. The irony carved deep. My first instinct had been to rescue, not destroy. But my rescue had been erased by their version of events. They didn't want a daughter who saved lives with a wrench. They wanted sons who looked clean holding trophies. Hook after hook buried itself into me. Why had Grandpa stayed silent at dinner when Dad retold the lie? Why didn't he stand up, slam the table, shout the truth? Why did he just meet my eyes across the mashed potatoes and nod once, as if telling me patience was the only shield? I hated him a little for that silence, even as I clung to his loyalty in private. By 9 p.m., when the house finally went quiet, I slipped into the garage. The burnt Chevy loomed like a corpse, hood blackened, metal twisted. I laid the wrench down on the concrete beside it. For the first time, I wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I was a curse, a monster meant to break what I touched. But then I remembered the look in my father's eyes when he was trapped under the frame. The moment before rage returned, when he was just a man afraid of dying. And I remembered that it was my hands, blackened and shaking, that pulled him free. That thought hardened something in me. If saving him meant being painted as reckless, then so be it. If Greece meant shame in their world, then Greece would be my badge. The whispers grew louder in the months that followed. I learned not to argue, not to defend myself. I learned to endure, but endurance has a way of forging steel. Years later, when I signed enlistment papers at 18, I didn't do it to escape. I did it to prove what the fire had already taught me. Sometimes survival means accepting the label they throw at you and turning it into armor. Because if I could survive being branded a monster in my own home, I could survive anything the army threw at me. And when the recruiter's office clock read 11 a.m. that day, the pen in my hand felt like the same wrench I had once used to save my father. The recruiter's office clock ticked past 11 a.m. when I pressed the pen hard against the enlistment papers. The ballpoint dug into the page as if carving steel, and when I lifted it away, the ink left my name sealed to a future I knew my family would never understand. I wasn't running. Not from the fire that scarred the Chevy, not from the nickname that clung like tar, not even from the humiliation of being branded reckless by my own blood. I was stepping into a place where grease on my hands wouldn't be a curse. I wanted a world where broken things could be fixed and where silence wasn't mistaken for guilt. 2 months later, at 5:30 a.m. on the parade grounds of Fort Lee, I stood in a line of 90 recruits. The Virginia humidity wrapped around us like a wet blanket. Drill sergeants moved down the row, their boots hammering the blacktop. One stopped in front of me, eyes flicking down to my frame. "You think you can lift a transmission, Martinez?" He barked. "Yes, Sergeant," I snapped back. He sneered. "Transmission's heavier than you are, let's see." By noon, sweat soaked through my fatigues. We were ordered to strip an M998 Humvee engine block. My arms shook, but I clenched the wrench and turned. The same tool that once pulled my father from under fire now braced me against every doubt. By the end of the exercise, my fingers were bleeding, but the engine was reassembled. That night in the barracks at 9 p.m., the laughter started. "Grease monkey," one private muttered as I scrubbed oil from my hands. Another chimed in, "Dirty girl doesn't belong here." The insult followed me like shadow, just as it had at home. But this time I didn't flinch. I smiled. "Grease keeps us alive," I said. "Try running a convoy without it." The room went quiet. A few men scoffed, but one nodded. Nicknames are currency in the army, and grease stuck. What began as insult hardened into call sign. Weeks turned into months. Fort Lee broke down the weak and welded the stubborn. I ran until my lungs burned, lifted until my muscles screamed, studied schematics until the blueprints blurred in my vision. Each dawn at 4:45 a.m., when the bugle split the air, I forced myself upright and whispered the same mantra Grandpa had given me: "Fire in your soul." During advanced training, we were given our first live test, repairing a disabled Humvee under simulated fire. Explosions cracked in the distance, smoke grenades thickened the air. Some recruits panicked. My hands, blackened with oil, moved steady. Disconnect the fuel line, swap the filter, torque the bolts. 30 minutes later, the engine roared to life and the convoy moved. "Martinez," the instructor said, jotting something in his notebook. "Ghost hands, fast, quiet." I didn't answer, but the words lodged deep. Ghost hands, grease hands. Either way, I was shaping a new identity, one they couldn't twist into shame. By the time graduation came, only 4 women remained out of 87 recruits. We stood at attention under a punishing noon sun, sweat crawling down our spines, boots clicking against the asphalt. When my name was called, I marched forward, saluted, and took the patch that marked me as a wheeled vehicle mechanic, MOS 91B. For the first time in years, the title fit. Not daughter, not curse. Mechanic, soldier. When the ceremony ended at 1 p.m., I sat alone on the steps, patch clutched in my palm, uniform soaked with salt. No family in the bleachers, no cheers from the crowd. Just silence. But silence no longer meant shame. It meant freedom. I thought of the fire back home, the black smoke curling against the sky, my father's eyes wide with fear. I thought of my brother's laughter, my mother's scorn. I thought of Grandpa's whisper. I was no longer their dirty girl. I was Grease, staff sergeant in the making, with a wrench sharper than any blade they had ever thrown my way. And soon enough, the battlefield would prove whether grease and steel could save more than engines. The desert heat in Afghanistan had its own clock. At 6 a.m., it baked you alive. By 2 p.m., it crushed you under a sky so bright it felt weaponized. That day, the convoy stretched along a dirt road outside Kabul, engines grumbling in protest, dust rising like ghosts behind us. I rode in the last MRAP, headset pressed tight, toolkit strapped across my lap. We hit the IED at 2:37 p.m. The explosion tore through the silence, flipping the lead Humvee like a child's toy. Smoke mushroomed upward, screams rattled over the comms. When the dust settled, 3 vehicles sat crippled in the kill zone, engines dead, wheels twisted. Small arms fire crackled from the ridge. We were trapped. "Convoy halt! Convoy halt!" The platoon leader's voice broke through. Panic vibrated underneath his order. I was already moving. My boots hit the sand hard, lungs filling with grit. Bullets snapped overhead, but I didn't hear them the way others did. To me, it was background noise like the hammering of a loose piston. The first MRAP radiator hissed steam, fluid spilling in a silver arc. Soldiers shouted, some firing back, others dragging the wounded behind cover. I threw myself under the hood, wrench in hand, fingers moving on instinct. Disconnect the busted hose. Clamp the new line, tighten the bolts. "Martinez, get down!" Someone yelled, "Convoy doesn't move without engines." I shouted back, "Hook one," a mechanic fighting under fire, not just fixing machines but keeping 20 men alive. By 3 p.m., one Humvee roared back to life. The driver floored it, tires clawing out of the dust. A cheer rippled through the comms, brief, before more gunfire pinned us down. I crawled under the second vehicle, sparks dancing as I welded a crack in the fuel line. Bullets struck the armor above me, pinging like hail on sheet metal. My heartbeat didn't quicken. My hands stayed steady. I thought of the Chevy fire back home, of my father's rage, of saving him when everyone swore I had ruined everything. This was the same, except failure now meant body bags. Hook two, irony burned through me. In my family's eyes, Greece made me reckless. Out here, Greece was salvation. At 4:10 p.m., the ambush grew desperate. Mortar rounds thudded into the dirt behind us. The squad leader shouted over comms, "Guardian Angel, report." I didn't realize at first he meant me. The name stuck because by then I had saved 2 convoys in less than a month. I gripped the wrench tighter. Angel or not, I was just a mechanic, a soldier with blackened hands. But to the squad pinned down in the dust, I was the difference between moving or dying. Hook 3. The nickname that was supposed to shame me was now being twisted into reverence. By dusk, 7:30 p.m., 14 vehicles rolled out of the kill zone, battered but alive. Behind us, smoke curled from the wreck of the lead Humvee, the only one I couldn't salvage. 11 men survived that ambush who might not have. 11 families would never know how close they came to folded flags. When we regrouped at the forward operating base that night, soldiers slapped my back, voices hoarse with gratitude. "Greece, you're a damn lifeline," one said. Another grinned. "Our guardian angel." But when the celebration faded, I sat alone by the motor pool, hands still trembling from adrenaline. The desert stars overhead were sharp as broken glass. I thought of home, of Lewis calling me a curse, of Mom shaking her head at my blackened nails. They had called me dirty girl as if Greece was filth. Out here, Greece was armor. Out here, every stain on my hands was proof that engines lived, that soldiers breathed, that convoys kept moving. I stared at the wrench in my lap, the same tool I had once used to pry my father free, the same tool that had drawn his wrath. Now it was my weapon, my shield, my scripture. Hook 4, the price of being the perfect killer of silence. The one who never falters, even under fire, was beginning to carve itself into my bones. When the clock struck 11 p.m., I laid down on the dirt, back against the warm steel of a repaired MRAP. Exhaustion pulled me under, but not before I whispered to myself, "Fire in your soul," Grandpa's words. The battlefield had made me indispensable, but I also knew what came next: medals, recognition, the hollow applause of a country, and the silence of a family who would never answer the phone, no matter how many lives I saved. The morning of the ceremony began at 8 a.m. in Washington, D.C., but my body still carried the desert dust of Afghanistan. My dress blues felt heavier than armor, each ribbon and badge pressing like weight plates against my chest. Soldiers gathered in rows, families filled the seats, and a brass band tuned their instruments. When my name was called, I walked across the stage, back straight, jaw locked. The Army Achievement Medal was pinned above my heart, the general's hand firm on my shoulder as flashbulbs popped. Applause rolled through the hall, polite and proud. But when I scanned the audience, the truth carved deeper than any battlefield wound. The chairs reserved for my family, 4 neat spaces in the front row, sat empty. No mother, no brothers, no Martinez at all. Hook 1. The roar of applause clashed against the silence of 4 empty chairs. I had survived convoys under fire, rebuilt engines with bullets snapping inches away, kept 500 vehicles alive in combat zones. Yet the one battle I couldn't win was convincing my family I was worth showing up for. After the ceremony at 1:30 p.m., I slipped outside, metal still gleaming, and dialed the number that never really belonged to me. The phone rang twice before my mother's voice answered. "Hello, it's me," I said. "Rosa." A pause, then the sharp inhale I knew by heart. "Why are you calling?" "I wanted you to know I was recognized today, the Army Achievement Medal. They called me." "Stop embarrassing us," she cut in. "Always bragging about playing with trucks like a boy, that's not something to be proud of." "I wasn't bragging," I whispered. "Don't call again." The line went dead. Hook 2, a mother's rejection cutting louder than battlefield gunfire. I stared at the phone, metal reflecting the weak sun, and for a moment I wished the award weighed nothing at all. Because in that instant, it was only a reminder of who hadn't clapped, who hadn't stood, who hadn't cared. Later that afternoon, lobbyists from a defense contractor approached me in the hotel lobby. Suits, polished shoes, smiles too perfect. "Staff Sergeant Martinez," one said, extending a manicured hand. "Your record is impressive. We'd like to talk about how your experience could help our company." Their tone was flattering, but their eyes were calculating. I had heard whispers already. Martinez Auto, the family garage, linked to suspicious contracts. And now, here they were, circling me like vultures. Hook 3. Why would a corporation that destroyed my family's garage now seek me out? I declined politely, stepping back, but I felt the net tightening. The Army had given me recognition, but it had also painted a target on my back. That night at 9 p.m., I sat alone in my hotel room. The metal case rested on the desk beside the phone. I dialed again, not my mother this time, but the garage back home. No one answered. Not Louis. Not Javier. Not even the machine. Just silence. Hook 4. Glory outside, rejection at home, and a growing suspicion that my medal meant something far more dangerous than honor. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the medal until the edges blurred. Soldiers downstairs were laughing, celebrating, calling families who answered on the first ring. For me, it was only static. At midnight, I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark, the metal box still unopened on the desk. The applause of strangers had faded, replaced by the echo of my mother's words. "Stop embarrassing us." The Army had given me a stage. My family had left it empty. But I knew this silence was not the end. It was the beginning. Because when I returned home, the garage would tell its own story: ruined machines, outdated tools, hidden files, and the truth would no longer stay buried under grease and shame. The plane touched down in Tennessee at 4:20 p.m., and by 6 p.m. I was back on the cracked asphalt of Martinez Auto. The shop looked smaller than I remembered, the paint on the sign sun-bleached, the letters of our name faded like a family memory no one cared to preserve. I pushed open the garage door and the smell hit me first, not the sharp tang of fresh oil, but the musty rot of machines abandoned too long. Dust lay thick on the diagnostic scanner in the corner, its screen dark. The hydraulic lift groaned as though protesting its own neglect. Hook 1, the garage that was once pride, now stood as a corpse, mirroring the decay of the family that abandoned me. Louis was behind the counter, sleeves rolled up but hands clean. Javier sat on a stool, scrolling through his phone, uninterested. They both looked up when I walked in, uniform still crisp from D.C., metal tucked in my pocket. "What are you doing here?" Louis asked flatly. "This is still my home," I said. He snorted. "Your home, you walked away years ago. You don't belong in this garage anymore." Javier chuckled. "Computers killed us, Rosa. Nobody brings cars here now. They want diagnostic codes, software patches. This place is finished. You can't fix that with a wrench." I stepped deeper inside, running my fingers over the dust-caked scanner. "You could have upgraded. You could have kept up." "Upgrade?" Louis laughed bitterly. "With what money? With what expertise? You think grease-stained hands can program a computer?" Hook 2, My brothers mocked me with the same insult, blind to the truth that I had already built something they could never understand. I didn't argue. Instead, I walked to the back where the old filing cabinet stood. I pulled open a drawer, fingers brushing past yellowed receipts and brittle invoices. Buried in the mess was a folder marked claims. Inside, half the pages bore insurance company seals. Overbilled parts, duplicate charges, altered numbers. Hook 3, hidden among the wreckage, was evidence of fraud that stretched far beyond one broken garage. I slipped the folder into my bag before they noticed. That night I stayed in the apartment above the shop. At 10:45 p.m. the radiator clanked, the air heavy with the smell of mildew. I sat by the window, staring down at the empty lot. Once, this place had been alive. Customers lined out the door, Grandpa's laugh booming from under the hood of a truck, tools clattering like music. Now it was only silence. I thought of the lobbyists at the hotel in D.C., of their too perfect smiles. The same contractor names appeared on the invoices in that folder. My brothers weren't just incompetent, they were complicit. And if they had tied the family garage to defense contracts, then the stakes weren't just bankruptcy. They were federal. Hook 4, the ruins of the garage weren't just the end of a family business. They were the beginning of a scandal large enough to bury us all. The next morning, at 5:15 a.m., I crept downstairs. The scanner blinked faintly when I pressed the power button. I pulled a flash drive from my pocket, a prototype I had built during long nights in Afghanistan, code I'd written in tents lit by single bulbs. I slid it into the port, watched lines of data flicker to life. The machine coughed awake, running smoother than it had in years. Still playing mechanic, Lewis's voice cut through the morning air. He stood in the doorway, coffee steaming in his hand. Not playing, I said. Fixing. He sneered. You'll never fix this place, you'll never fix us. Maybe he was right about the family, but not about the machines. The machines still listened to me. By 7 a.m., I had extracted enough files from the scanner to confirm my suspicions. Fraud, overlapping accounts, defense parts billed twice. The web was bigger than Martinez Auto. As the sun rose, painting the garage in dull gold, I realized this wasn't about inheritance anymore. It wasn't even about respect. It was about survival. And if the family thought ruins could bury me, they had forgotten one thing. I knew how to build from wreckage. The files I pulled from the garage scanner still burned in my pocket when I boarded the plane for my second deployment. It was 6:40 a.m. at the Nashville airport, the terminal half empty, the smell of burnt coffee and floor polish thick in the air. My brothers hadn't come to see me off. They hadn't even known I was leaving again. I didn't tell them. In my rucksack, tucked between spare uniforms and a half-broken torque wrench, was the flash drive containing everything: fraudulent invoices, duplicate billing records, contractor names that had appeared in whispers at the Pentagon. The garage might have been a ruin, but it wasn't dead. It was rotten, and rot spreads. Hook 1. A failing family shop hiding ties to corruption big enough to follow me across an ocean. By 8 p.m. that night, I was back under the khaki sky of Afghanistan, diesel fumes in the air, the clang of hammers echoing from the motor pool. Soldiers brought me busted engines, cracked transmissions, Humvees that rattled like skeletons. I fixed them all, but after lights out at 11 p.m., I slipped into the comms tent with a battered laptop. That's where Torque Tech was born. I coded by flashlight, hunched over keys sticky with dust. My prototype diagnostic software started simple, an algorithm to read fault codes faster than any human. But as the months passed, it grew teeth. I built predictive models, repair simulations, overlays that could save hours in the field. Hook 2, by day I was Grease the mechanic. By night I became the ghostwriter of a technology that could change the industry. The Army noticed in small ways. Martinez, how'd you get this truck back online so fast? Grease, you some kind of magician. I just shrugged, kept my secret. Torque Tech wasn't theirs yet, it was mine. The more I built, the more I remembered the laughter back home. Dirty girl. Grease monkey. She'll marry her wrench. They meant it as ridicule, but it fueled me. Every line of code was revenge disguised as innovation. At 2:10 a.m. on a sleepless night, I uploaded my first demo to a hidden server. Watching the program spit out a full diagnostic on a Humvee engine in 30 seconds felt like watching fire catch dry grass, inevitable, unstoppable. Hook 3, the tool my family mocked me for holding, was now reshaping into a weapon of empire. But the closer I came to finishing it, the more eyes began to follow me. An officer from logistics asked too many questions. A contractor rep lingered too long at the motor pool. Once, when I returned to my bunk at 5:45 a.m., I found my laptop slightly off angle, a smear of fingerprints that weren't mine on the case. Hook 4. The world that ignored me at home now seemed desperate to know what I was building. I encrypted everything, hid backups in hollowed-out manuals, slipped code fragments into letters I mailed back to myself stateside. Still, I felt the walls closing. One night, the base went dark after a mortar attack. We scrambled into bunkers, the ground shaking, sirens wailing. I clutched the flash drive tighter than my rifle. If the world burned, Torque Tech had to live. By dawn, the attack passed, the sun bleeding red over the desert horizon. I walked out covered in dust, metal ribbons still pinned crookedly to my uniform from the last ceremony. My squad clapped me on the back, alive again. But in my pocket, the flash drive pulsed like a second heart. When deployment ended, I flew home at 7:25 p.m. on a Friday, the plane touching down into Nashville twilight. No one greeted me at the terminal. My family hadn't answered a single call in months, but something else had changed. An email waited in my inbox, stamped with an FBI header. The subject line was simple: we need to talk about Martinez Auto. Hook 5. My family ignored me, but the bureau had not. I closed the laptop slowly, the words pressing heavier than any battlefield. Torque Tech was no longer just my secret. It was bait. It was evidence. It was salvation. And if I was right, it would soon be the key that turned the ruins of Martinez Auto into the center of a national scandal. The email from the FBI sat unopened in my inbox when I drove back into Jackson County at 3:10 p.m. on a muggy Thursday. The garage lot was empty, weeds sprouting through cracks in the pavement. A foreclosure notice flapped on the office door, corners curled from the summer heat. Martinez Auto had finally collapsed, just as my brothers predicted, except they were the ones who drove it into the ground. Inside, the air reeked of mildew and stale gasoline. Boxes were half-packed, invoices scattered across the floor like dead leaves. Lewis was on the phone, voice sharp. "We can't make the payments, damn it. The bank won't extend us anymore." He saw me froze, then turned away as if my uniform made him itch. At 3:30 p.m., Mom arrived, face painted with powder that couldn't mask the years of bitterness. She dropped her purse on the counter and glared. "If you were a real daughter," she said, "you'd save us, but you're too busy chasing medals to understand what family loyalty means." Hook 1. The same family that mocked me now demanded salvation, as though betrayal could be undone with grease and silence. I said nothing. Words had never mattered here. They had rewritten the fire, twisted my childhood, erased my victories. Now, even as their world collapsed, they looked to me only as a scapegoat or savior, never a sister. Javier slammed a drawer shut. "Don't think you're any better. Torque Tech, whatever that garbage is, you probably stole the code from us. You always stole." I laughed once, bitter. Stole from what? Empty drawers and outdated scanners. Hook 2. Accusation layered on top of failure, proof they would rather see me criminal than admit their own ruin. By 5 p.m., the bank representative arrived with 2 deputies. Paperwork was signed. The garage was officially gone. Dolores wrung her hands, tears painted on like a mask. "This is your fault, Rosa," she spat. "If you had come back sooner, if you'd acted like a daughter, we wouldn't be here." I wanted to tell her about Torque Tech, about the flash drive with records of fraud and the FBI email waiting like a time bomb. I wanted to throw the proof in her face, but I held it back. Sometimes silence is sharper than any wrench. At 7 p.m., as the deputies changed the locks, I stepped outside. The neon sign that once read Martinez Auto flickered, then went dark for the last time. I stood there under the fading light, the same wrench I'd carried through war heavy in my hand. That's when the black sedan pulled up, windows tinted, engine humming low. A man in a suit stepped out, the same man I had seen in the back row of the courtroom. His tie was loose, his face calm, but his eyes tracked me like crosshairs. "Staff Sergeant Martinez," he said, voice steady. "I'm Agent Keene. We need to talk." Hook 3. The FBI wasn't just circling, they had landed on my doorstep, timing their arrival with the death of the garage. We sat in the sedan at 7:20 p.m., papers spread across the seat between us. Copies of the very invoices I had pulled from the scanner months earlier. "We've been watching Martinez Auto for a long time," Keene said. "Fraud tied to defense contracts. Your brother's names are all over it, but there's something bigger. Someone funneled these through a network we can't map. We think you already have the key." I slid the flash drive from my pocket. His eyes sharpened. "This isn't just about a garage, is it?" I asked. "No," he said simply. "This is about $50 million and the people willing to bury anyone who gets close to it." Hook 4. The ruins of my family's empire were only the surface of a conspiracy that stretched into national contracts. At 8:45 p.m., I walked back into the house above the shop for the last time. Boxes half-filled, floorboards creaking, the smell of mold and despair. My brothers sat at the kitchen table, heads low, whispering to each other. They didn't look up when I entered. Mom turned instead. "Well, did you fix it?" I met her eyes, said nothing, and dropped the foreclosure notice on the counter. Her face crumpled, not with grief but with rage. I climbed the stairs, packed my duffel, and left the house key on the banister. At 9:30 p.m., I stood outside in the dark, cicadas shrilling like static. The garage behind me was locked forever. But the fight wasn't finished. The collapse wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the legal war my family had always dared me to fight. And this time, it wouldn't be fought with grease and wrenches. It would be fought with truth, patents, and every secret they had buried under my name. The collapse of Martinez Auto should have been the end of it, but my family was never content with silence. Within weeks of the foreclosure, subpoenas arrived. My name was splashed across court filings, twisted into the role of thief and traitor. Louis and Javier weren't content to watch the garage die. They wanted me buried with it. The case opened on a gray Monday morning. The courthouse smelled of damp wool and scorched coffee, the same place where they had called me dirty girl, now turning into their stage again. Across the aisle, my brothers sat in polished suits, my mother's rosary clenched in her hand like a weapon. Their lawyer painted the narrative quickly. Rosa Martinez stole proprietary designs from Martinez Auto and used them to build her company, Torque Tech. Hook 1. The same family that mocked me for building machines now accused me of stealing the very knowledge they swore I never had. The prosecutor waved a stack of emails in the air. He claimed they showed me transferring files from the shop computer years earlier, messages laced with words like prototype and system schematic. The crowd murmured, a wave of judgment thickening the air. I leaned forward, eyes steady. Those emails were fabrications, but to the untrained eye they were damning. My hands, once blistered from battlefield engines, now gripped the edge of a courtroom table. I was no longer fixing steel. I was fighting lies. Hook 2. For the first time, my enemy wasn't sand, fire, or rust. It was paper, ink, and deceit sharp enough to sever my life's work. The judge asked if I would testify. My lawyer nodded toward me. I rose, uniform crisp, ribbons gleaming faintly. The courtroom quieted as I spoke. I built Torque Tech while deployed overseas, alone under canvas tents and blackout lights. No one at Martinez Auto knew the code. They didn't even know how to boot the scanner I used. They laughed when I suggested upgrades. Now they call my work theft. Gasps scattered through the room, but Lewis smirked, waiting for his lawyer to deliver the next blow. Staff Sergeant, the attorney said smoothly, you claim innovation, but the timeline is suspect. How could you build such a system while engaged in combat? How could you balance firefights and coding? I clenched my jaw, the memory vivid. Typing by flashlight, mortar shells shaking the tent, fingers smeared with grease and ash. Because when survival depends on machines working, you learn to innovate. Soldiers lived because I built. I don't need your belief, I have proof. My lawyer submitted the patent filings, dates etched in government records, months before Martinez Auto collapsed. Hook 3. The very system they mocked was already protected under my name, long before they claimed it was theirs. The trial dragged for hours. Witnesses were called. Javier swore I sabotaged the garage, planting viruses in diagnostic machines. Lewis claimed I had used family resources to launch Torque Tech. My mother sat clutching her rosary, whispering to anyone who would listen. She betrayed us. But when cross-examination began, cracks split open. The supposed emails had metadata showing they were created months after Torque Tech's filing. The defense stammered, tried to redirect, but the seed of doubt had already been planted in the jury. Hook 4. Lies had carried them this far, but the timeline itself had become their noose. By late afternoon, I noticed Agent Keene in the gallery again, the same calm expression as always. He wasn't here for inheritance. He was here for fraud that stretched far beyond my family. When his eyes met mine, the unspoken truth settled. This trial wasn't just about vindication. It was about detonating the bigger conspiracy tied to defense contracts. The judge called for recess. My family huddled in whispers, anger flashing in their eyes. I stepped outside into the heavy Tennessee air, metal ribbon catching the last light of day. I wasn't free yet, but I wasn't alone either. The next session promised revelation. The flash drive, the video Grandpa had left behind, the FBI testimony, those were still waiting in the wings. And when they came, every lie that had shackled me since childhood would finally burn away, leaving only the truth behind. The second day of trial began under a cloudless Tennessee sky. The courthouse was already crowded when I arrived, reporters clustering like vultures at the steps. Inside, the air carried the dry taste of anticipation. The judge's gavel cracked through the murmur, and once again I found myself facing the people who had called me a curse since childhood. Lewis sat rigid, jaw tight, papers spread across the table like weapons. Javier leaned back, smug, whispering to the lawyer beside him. My mother clutched her rosary as if God would rewrite the truth if she prayed hard enough. Across the aisle, my attorney tapped the folder containing what we had saved for this moment. The patent, the FBI's evidence, and the one thing my family hadn't known existed, Grandpa's testament. The prosecutor started his attack early. Your Honor, the defendant would have this court believe she alone created Torque Tech Diagnostics, yet all evidence shows Martinez Auto had been working on similar technology. He raised the forged emails again. Here is proof she stole from her family, betrayed her bloodline, and built her empire on their bones. The gallery stirred. Whispers, gasps, shaking heads. The same poison I had grown up swallowing now echoed in a courtroom. Hook 1. My family was using the same lie that had defined my life, turning my survival into betrayal, my grease into guilt. My lawyer rose calmly. Your Honor, if the court will allow, we'd like to enter new evidence into the record, evidence that will dismantle this narrative. He handed the clerk a flash drive. The screen at the front flickered to life, and dates stamped in government ink appeared. Patent filings, lodged months before the alleged emails were ever written. The defendant's system, my lawyer said, voice cutting like a wrench against rust, was legally documented before Martinez Auto collapsed. This technology was never theirs. It was hers alone. Hook 2. The patent stripped their accusations bare, their timeline undone by truth carved in law. Lewis shifted in his seat, face pale, but the prosecutor pressed on. Filing dates can be manipulated. This doesn't absolve her theft. That was when Agent Keene stood. The FBI badge glinted as he walked to the witness stand. The courtroom held its breath. Martinez Auto, Keene began, was not developing any diagnostic software. They were inflating invoices, double-billing contractors, and funneling parts through a fraudulent supply chain worth over $50 million. Torque Tech didn't steal from the garage, it exposed it. The room erupted, lawyers shouting, reporters scribbling, my brother's faces draining of blood. The judge slammed the gavel for order. Hook 3. What had started as a family dispute exploded into a national scandal in one breath. But Keene wasn't finished. He nodded toward me. And there is one more piece of evidence the Bureau recovered. A video left by Earl Martinez, the original founder of the garage. The lights dimmed as the screen lit again. There was Grandpa, older than I remembered, face lined like worn leather, voice gravel low. He sat at his workbench, the same wrench in his hand that I had once used to free my father. If you're watching this, he said, then the lies have grown too heavy. This garage was never meant for thieves. Rosa was the only one who understood the future. Grease in her hands meant fire in her soul. Don't let them take that from her. My chest tightened. In silence, tears blurred the edges of the screen. For years, I thought his quiet nods were cowardice. Now I saw them for what they were, faith. Hook 4. The man who had stayed silent in life now roared in death, his voice dismantling the lies that had caged me. When the video ended, the courtroom stood frozen. My mother's rosary slipped from her fingers, beads scattering like broken chains. Lewis shouted that it was fake. Javier demanded it be stricken, but their protests rang hollow. Even the prosecutor looked cornered, his scalpels dulled. The judge leaned forward. With this testimony, the fabricated emails, and the Bureau's findings, the court has no choice but to acknowledge the truth. Torque Tech belongs to Staff Sergeant Rosa Martinez. The fraud rests elsewhere. I breathed out, steady, the way I had under fire in Afghanistan. For the first time in my life, the burden wasn't on me to prove worth. The evidence had spoken louder than my family's accusations ever could. The gallery erupted again, this time not in whispers but in applause. Veterans who had slipped in quietly, soldiers who had once served beside me stood clapping. One shouted, "Lifeline!" Another called, "Guardian Angel." The sound wasn't hollow. It was recognition earned not by bloodline, but by sweat, grease, and survival. Hook 5. Vindication didn't come from family. It came from the truth, the law, and the community that had trusted me all along. When court adjourned, I stepped outside into the late afternoon light. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. How does it feel to win? What do you say to your family now? I didn't answer. Instead, I lifted the old wrench Grandpa had left me, the one the FBI returned as part of his video evidence. I held it high above my head. The crowd went silent, the cymbals speaking louder than words. Because this was never just about a garage. It was about reclaiming the fire they had tried to smother. And though the verdict vindicated me, I knew the journey wasn't over. There was still one chapter left, to decide what to do with the ruins and how to transform them into something worth leaving behind. The crowd outside the courthouse was still buzzing when I lowered Grandpa's wrench. Flashbulbs popped, questions spilled from reporters, but I stepped past them, letting the weight of the moment sink into my bones. The verdict had given me vindication. The FBI had cleared my name. Torque Tech was officially mine, and $800 million empire built from Knight's coding under desert canvas. But walking down those courthouse steps, I knew the story wasn't finished. Winning in court was survival. What came next had to be legacy. The following week, I returned to the place where everything began. Martinez auto stood hollow, padlocked after foreclosure, the sign above the bay doors cracked and weathered. I unlocked the chain with new keys, this time issued not by a bank but by my own hand. The air inside was stale, heavy with dust, but I imagined what it could become, not just a garage but a training ground. Hook 1. The ruin that symbolized betrayal was about to become the foundation of a new future. Torque Tech had given me resources my family never believed I could earn. With it, I bought back the property and cleared its debts. Contractors arrived to strip the old machines, hauling out rusted lifts and broken scanners. At dawn, the lot filled with the sound of drills and welders. By sunset, new steel beams rose from the cracked floor, walls echoing with possibility. I envisioned classrooms where young mechanics could learn diagnostics. I saw veterans returning from deployment, their hands still stained with oil, finding a second home here. Most of all, I imagined girls, kids who reminded me of myself at 8 years old, spark plug in hand, told they didn't belong. This center would tell them otherwise. Hook 2, what was once a curse for me, grease under my nails, would become a badge of honor for the next generation. The day of the opening came months later. At noon, I stood in front of the refurbished building, the sign above the doors reborn. Martinez Veteran Automotive Training Center. My uniform still fit, though the metals felt lighter than they once had. Behind me, Torque Tech banners fluttered in the wind. Before me, a crowd gathered. Veterans, students, reporters, neighbors who had whispered about the fire years ago, now craning to see what rose from its ashes. I held Grandpa's wrench high again, this time not as a weapon in court, but as a symbol of inheritance reclaimed. "Welcome," I said. This place was built on hands like ours, hands that the world called dirty, hands that families dismissed, hands that carried engines and rifles and sometimes both. Today, we stop apologizing for grease. Today, grease builds empires. Applause rolled across the lot, louder than any courtroom cheer, steadier than any military medal ceremony. Among the faces, I spotted soldiers from my old unit, a few who had once called me guardian angel. They nodded, silent salute in their eyes. Hook 3. The identity my family mocked became the cornerstone of an empire that couldn't be taken away. After the ribbon was cut, I walked through the bays. New lifts gleamed under fluorescent lights, diagnostic computers hummed, and young recruits bent over engines with determination. One girl looked up, dark hair tied back, fingers blackened with oil. "MS, Martinez," she asked shyly, "is it true you fix trucks under fire?" I smiled. It's true, but more important than fixing them was never giving up on them. Same goes for yourself. Her grin lit brighter than the machines. For the first time in decades, I felt the wound of childhood heal, not erased but reforged into strength. By evening, the center quieted. At 7 p.m., I climbed the stairs to the office overlooking the bays. On the wall, I mounted Grandpa's wrench, polished now, framed under glass. Beneath it, I hung the Torque Tech logo. Beside them both, I placed the Army Achievement Medal. Together they told the story not of ruin, but of survival, vindication, and transformation. Hook 4. The objects that once symbolized shame, grease, wrench, metal, now stood united as proof of fire that never died. Looking out the window, I thought of my family. I didn't hate them anymore. Hate would mean carrying their weight. Instead, I let the silence stand where their voices once cut. The garage was no longer theirs. It was mine, and now it belonged to every hand that the world had tried to shame. This is what freedom looked like. Not revenge, not even justice. Just the right to decide who you are and the chance to pass that choice on to someone else. So if you've ever been dismissed for dirty hands, overlooked because you didn't fit their mold, or called a failure by your own blood, this story is for you. You are not ruined. You are forged. Watch until the end, because grease doesn't just stain, it builds. May you walk away from this story with fire in your soul, as Grandpa once whispered to me, and may you find your own wrench to carry forward. Thank you for listening to my journey. May you stay safe, may you stay strong, and may you never let anyone tell you what your hands are worth. If Rosa's journey spoke to you, I invite you to stay with this channel. Leave a comment, share your own story, and subscribe for the stories of other women who served. Every voice matters, and we read every one. May you walk away from this story with strength and peace.